Tom here from Metalloud, and welcome to part one of the Say Anything review series. We're taking a look at every single Say Anything album. So to start things off, we're going to begin with their first album called Baseball.
I am so damn trusting, I do not see their malice in this blockage.
Now, many people think of Is a Real Boy as being Say Anything's first album, and while that was their first kind of breakout album, Baseball is actually their true first album that they released as a band. And this was in the very, very early days. I think this was either written or both written and recorded when Max was still in high school. And it really kind of shows on this album. It also kind of shows that it's not a very well produced album. It's very rough around the edges in every way, shape, and form. It doesn't feel like there was anybody kind of guiding Max with his songwriting, where some of the songs kind of just come off feeling forced or juvenile, or have these like really long unnecessary intros, or the choruses are kind of just obvious and kind of really not that catchy just because they kind of feel cheesy. They feel like they were written by something that was written for more like a very younger crowd. I mean, like preschool-ish in that kind of rhyming sense. And a lot of the songs on here kind of suffer for that. They're not as great as what becomes Say Anything. However, that said, there's so many flashes of brilliance in this album that we do see later on with this band, particularly with Max Bemis's writing on here. There's some very clever lines. There's some very kind of biting and acerbic, sarcastic lines, and while a lot of the topics on here kind of deal with the male perspective of kind of the girl left me and I'm bummed about that, or whatever, she's not with me, she's with another guy. There's a few songs on here like that, and you know, that like I said, it's very, very high school. You really get a sense of what time period this was written in and where they were when this was kind of written. However, that said, again, there's still some very great moments on this album. There's some fantastic songs, kind of like their first kind of breakout song. And when I say breakout, I mean this was a song that was kind of really passed along the internet, something that, you know, you probably had heard of if you were, you know, on LimeWire or FrostWire or whatever back then, or any of those sites at the time. You probably encountered, if you were into this type of music, the song Colorblind, which is the opening track off of this album. And that one is definitely a great song. It's, again, not a great produced song, but the lyricism in that song really kind of managed to shine through that, and it really makes it a better song for that. Then you have tracks like Showdown at P-Town, which, again, another great lyrically dense song. It's got a fantastic hook in there. The ending is kind of a little bit cheesy, but still kind of cool. Again, a lot of these feel like they could have been much, much better songs if there was somebody there kind of guiding them along a little bit, but not to say that these are bad songs on here. The song All My Friends Are Enemies, that's another great kind of track of just, you know, shitty people in your life and dealing with that, and people you thought were your friends kind of stabbing you in the back, and it's done in this kind of fun, ironic way. I mean, there's some tracks on there that, like I said, are kind of not great just because of the sheer cheesiness of them, like Ocean Liner Incident, which the chorus part of that really just feels like it has the rhyming scheme of something more geared towards like preschoolers or something like that. It's very simplistic, and it's not that enjoyable. It doesn't really hold up anymore. I don't even think it really held up then. I'm sure it was a fun song for them to write. I'm sure they, you know, again, this is something that I believe, again, was written during their, you know, high school years, so it's kind of understandable a lot of the issues that I have with this album and with these tracks and things. I don't know if this was actually recorded in a studio. I know Max was doing a lot of his own recording at home, things like that. So I can't speak for, necessarily if this is excusable because it was kind of not done in a studio, but again, the audio quality on here is just kind of very rough and poor. Vocally, there's a lot of cracks and pops and things like that could have easily been avoided. There's the guitar work as well, kind of often is muddled, and it's just a very not well produced track, not well produced album. It's excusable because I'm sure being in high school, they weren't really funded well. I'm sure they didn't really have a ton of money if this was in a studio. I'm sure you can Google it or whatever, but if it was done in a studio, I'm sure that they didn't have a lot to kind of contribute to it. I'm sure they didn't know personally issues with the album that they might have been able to speak up about, so it's a little definitely excusable as far as why it's an early album. This was released in 2002, but generally speaking, this is kind of a mixed bag. It's more of a historical piece at this point. I mean, for the band that's become so big and so popular, to go back and see where they started with, and you certainly get a sense of what they will become from this album. Like I said, there's some flashes of brilliance in there that you can definitely see, particularly with Max Bemis's lyrics and the song structures and the hooks and things like that. You really kind of can see where they're going with it and how they kind of evolved. And it's definitely nice to see where the band started from, so you can kind of see that journey from this point to what they would later become. But it's still, at the same time, you're not really going to go back to this album and be like, this is their best work, or this is a fantastic album, or anything like that. It's this is definitely an album I would say would be fun if you were friends with them at the time and they passed this along. I'm sure it's enjoyable, definitely better than what a lot of high school bands were doing, but it's hard to kind of really criticize it. Like I said, a lot of the criticisms are excusable simply because of their age and where they were and things like that at this point when this album was written, recorded, and everything like that. But at the same time, if you kind of take that out and kind of ignore that fact, it's really not that great of an album in general. Again, I suggest listening to it. It's worth listening to because you can kind of see their journey and you get a sense of where everything began with this. So for that reason, it definitely works out, but it's something that's not really going to stay with you or anything like that. Alright guys, those are my thoughts on Say Anything's first album, Baseball. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more. I will be posting these hopefully one every couple weeks so I can get them all done. They do have a lot of they don't really have a lot of albums. They have EPs, albums, a lot of songs here and there. There's a lot to cover when it comes to Say Anything, and I kind of want to discuss all of what they've done so far, so I can kind of build up to what is hopefully going to be a new release for 2016.